there's essentially a bed and breakfast network. And I half joked cynically that it won't be long before we have Yelp and TripAdvisor reviews of these shelters. Many of them subsidized and operated largely by Catholic organizations and sects, the Scalabrinians, the Jesuit Refugee Service, and a lot of rank and file Catholics. How many Catholics in the room? I'm raising my hand. Yes, right. Everybody in this room knows what's going on. And I've urged people to do more homework, and I provided a lot of fodder for them to show where your money actually goes that you put in the collection plate. And for example, every Sunday, usually Sunday before Thanksgiving, I think it's going to be the Sunday after since Thanksgiving is so late, there's a national collection for the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. The knowing groans tell me that you in this room know, but not enough Catholics understand that what they're doing is subsidizing. This isn't just remotely Alinskyite. Directly related to Saul Alinsky allying with the former bishop of the Chicago Diocese, Bernard Scheel, to provide a permanent funding mechanism for left-wing organizing. It is a political arm. And CCHD has been at the forefront of lobbying for every amnesty since 1986. They put the dreamer illegal alien students' rights and needs and so-called privileges above Catholic American students and workers, certainly. And along with that, there's a larger left-wing agenda, which is pro-abortion and pro-restorative justice in the schools to prevent consequences for dangerous students. And a lot of that is to sort of erase unpleasant racial disparities that they don't want any record of. That's what led to the Parkland shooting, this restorative justice ideology. And CCHD is just one of the many tentacles of the Open Borders Catholic machine. And we all know in this room that Pope Francis has essentially designated himself the global leader of the anti-Trump, anti-American sovereignty resistance. So when I advocate for actually taking action on the information in the book, the first thing that we can do to defund Open Borders Inc., it doesn't even have to happen at some national political level, is stop putting money in the collection plates and start this next Sunday for the national collection for CCHD.
This is the second collection.
Right, second collection, yes. Thank you for clarity. But that's the only way that things are going to change is if you hit these institutions in the pocketbook.
Absolutely. And I thought it was interesting because I had always noted that the divide on the immigration issue in this country is often a matter of different worldview of elites and regular Americans. But I thought you made an interesting point in the book about why the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, which, as you point out, has strayed a long way from its original mission.
Yeah, which is fascinating. I don't know if you all know this, but really they started out as a post-World War II organization to support American soldiers.
And now they're part of Open Borders Inc., but the motivation is, I think there is some of that elite, regular person divide, but your point also, there's more to it than that, and I'll let you articulate that.
Well, tell me if there's so much there, but I think one of the points that I made was sort of the transnational alliance with the United Nations and this shared goal of subverting local control, which is at the heart of sort of the principles of the founding of this country, and subverting American sovereignty by taking an end run around it, mostly through the refugee resettlement program. And so that these globalists outside of our borders get to determine who comes into our country, where people are redistributed, and without any sense of feedback or sense of self-determination in the very communities where hundreds of thousands of people, many of them coming from countries that are hostile to our interests and shared values, and fundamentally transforming, to borrow that infamous phrase, America community by community.
And that the church is the largest non-governmental refugee resettlement agency in the world, or more specifically, the Migration and Refugee Services branch of the U.S. Conference.
Yes.
And they were reimbursed to the tune of more than $11 million in each of the last 2 years for which we have information for administrative costs and program services for refugee resettlement activities. This is big money, and the
It is
U.S.
a racket.
Catholic Church is one of the biggest government contractors in the refugee resettlement industry.
Yeah, and so notice that this is such a textbook example of media bias, because the Washington Post and the fake news manufacturers of the New York Times, which I call the fish wrap of record, will that's an insult to fish wrap. Fish wrap is useful, but they'll dutifully report on all of these religious organizations that are direct contractors or subcontractors in the refugee resettlement racket, and they'll moan about, for example, President Trump's reduction in the numbers of refugees resettled. Last month there were 0 that were relocated here, to which I say 3 cheers. To which the Open Borders Inc. establishment responds, racist. And many America First lip service payers in the Republican Party will also gasp in horror if we say out loud what America First really means. And they'll report on all of the hue and cry from these religious organizations that will beat up America and say that we're turning our backs and this is not who we are, you know, as if the Emma Lazarus poem is the preamble to the Constitution, right? That's
Or in federal statute.
oh yes, exactly. But they will not mention, which should be right there as, you know, the first clause in describing them, how much money they're making, right? And how much they stand to lose if President Trump succeeds in doing this.
And that gave them standing in one of the lawsuits against the refugee policy, was that they were going to have a lot of money and have to fire staff.
Wow.
Since when do you get to sue about that?
Yeah.
Well, one more thing I want to touch on before we open it up for questions, and this is important because in the near future, the White House is going to be releasing its new immigration reform proposal, which has been crafted by Jared Kushner. It's being billed as different things, as a campaign document, but it's being written up as an actual bill that they hope will unite the Republican Party around a particular proposal. And this is going to increase permanent immigration by about 10%. Especially in the categories of employment immigration, which is designed to give green cards to a lot of the people who have been living here for years, having arrived as guest workers. And there are a lot of good enforcement provisions with it. Anti-sanctuary measures, asylum reform, E-Verify, measures to make it easier to deport criminals and gang members. But we know if it is designed to be legislation that there will be an amnesty added and there will be more guest worker admissions added to it as well. In fact, this week the House passed a farm worker amnesty and guest worker bill. They're teeing all of these things up to be attached to the Kushner plan. But so much of the focus of this plan is on green cards for guest workers. How did we get so many guest workers here? Somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million in various different categories. How did that happen? And should we be giving them a fast track to green cards?
At this point, all of the red lights, the emergency lights, are flashing on our country. And what I proposed in 2002 in the aftermath of the 9/11 terrorist attacks is something that really needs to be escalated even further. We need a break. We need a pause. We need an overall immigration moratorium, period. This is a country of 330 million people. The Democrats are always pointing to the homelessness problem in every major metropolitan area that is run by Democrats for over the last 30, 40 years. And America first and American sovereignty means that we take care of our own here first. And with regard to guest workers and the sound and fury from the usual suspects in both parties, the uniparty of low-wage workers, there's no such thing as an IT tech worker shortage, and that's what the subject of Sold Out is all about. That is a manufactured crisis. And
Truly.
the thing is that the left alone and George Soros would not be able to accomplish that goal in conjunction with Silicon Valley and Mark Zuckerberg and Forward.us and all of the lobbies for the corporate interests, if not for the enabling partnership by largely Senate Republicans. It's Mike Lee that's out there crusading for so much of that. And he's got other Senate Republicans with him on board, and before him it was Orrin Hatch, throwing American workers under the bus. And I think that these things get through because there's not enough exposure of them. There's not enough tough, honest talk about how these programs are run to the detriment of our American workforce. There's age discrimination, there's citizenship discrimination, and there's a massive betrayal of young people. And that's why I think we're seeing more and more, especially on college campuses, that independent young people who were urged to go into STEM fields because there would be a guarantee of a good job at the end of it, are discovering that what's stapled to their diplomas? Well, you know, a trip back to their parents' basement when they can't get jobs.
Right.
And then condescension among the elites in both parties that, oh yeah, what do you mean? But, you know, who's responsible for, you know, the situation that so many of these young people are in? And a lot of them are disillusioned about what their future might bring. And there aren't enough people addressing it in either party, certainly not in the clown car of the Democratic presidential field. That's what's shocking to me, that in a country of 330 million people, there isn't one person who can self-identify as a Democrat and not see that there's a huge opportunity here. I mean, that's just, it's flabbergasting.
There used to be a few Democrats who.
Barbara Jordan, God bless her.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but yes, it's, yeah, there's this myth that there's, you know, Johnny can't do math and we have a shortage of skilled workers, and the first myth is that all of these workers are actually all that skilled to begin with.
Yes. Yes, and we dissect that in Sold Out.
Highly recommend.
Yes.
So I want to let you folks have a chance to ask some questions.